So if there's ever been a definitive answer to the ruling class line that protest doesn't work, that demonstrations are pointless, it's been delivered by the people of Egypt. The revolutionary masses concentrated in Tahrir Square and in public spaces across the country have now overthrown 2 presidents in 2.5 years. By taking to the streets in massive numbers, the people have forced the wealthy and the powerful to bow before their demands. And although we haven't seen the same level of uprising in the United States yet, we know that this spirit of resistance is common to all poor and oppressed people around the world. In the last few days, tens of thousands have poured into the streets in militant demonstrations to protest the outrageous acquittal of George Zimmerman. This struggle has even made an impression on the Egyptian people. This Tuesday's demonstration in Los Angeles that was organized by the Answer Coalition and the Party for Socialism and Liberation was featured on the front page of a major newspaper in Egypt. The courage and determination displayed by this movement, led by the black community, shows that the people have the power to win justice for Trayvon by taking aim at the racist system that led his killer walk. But this isn't a straightforward process. History shows us that revolution is full of twists and turns. I want to go over the dramatic recent events in Egypt, some background on the revolution, and the pressing issues facing the revolutionaries today, because by learning from the struggle of our Egyptian sisters and brothers, we can be better prepared to make revolution in the United States. It's hard to overstate the size of the enormous wave of demonstrations that began sweeping the country on June 30th. Literally tens of millions of people participated, and when you consider the number of protesters relative to Egypt's population, some estimate that these were actually the largest demonstrations in history. The target of the June 30th uprising was the increasingly reactionary government of President Mohamed Morsi, backed by the Muslim Brotherhood and its political arm, the Freedom and Justice Party. But this upsurge was just one chapter in an ongoing revolutionary process. The Egyptian Revolution began on January 25th, 2011. Tens of thousands showed up for demonstrations called to protest the designation of that day as National Police Day. Protesters drew inspiration from the 2008 strike of textile workers in the city of Mahala and a growing anti-police brutality movement, and were driven to act by rising inequality and unemployment. The target of their movement was the corrupt, oppressive regime of dictator Hosni Mubarak. Ruling the country since 1981, Mubarak was fully backed by US imperialism, which propped up his regime with billions of dollars in military aid and crucial political support. In return, Mubarak opened up Egypt to foreign exploitation, removing trade protection, privatizing the state's assets, and reducing the living standards of poor and working people to line the pockets of foreign capitalists and their domestic puppets. In the face of the most vicious repression the regime was capable of carrying out, the Egyptian people continued their protests in growing numbers, and 2.5 weeks later, Hosni Mubarak was toppled, helping to spark a revolutionary wave that swept the Arab world. While the revolutionary forces made many gains as a result of their courage between January 25th and February 11th, the next political period was also characterized by sharp struggle. The Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, also called the SCAF, composed of the highest-ranking officers in the military, replaced Mubarak as the governing force of Egypt. Many gains were made in the field of democratic rights, recognized by the military as necessary concessions to the revolutionary masses, but most of the same injustices that characterized the Mubarak era persisted. Economic conditions continued to deteriorate as Egypt began to suffocate under a mountain of foreign debt, which is a legacy of the colonial era of underdevelopment, as well as present-day neocolonialism. The SCAF expanded the use of its own instruments of repression, and over 15,000 civilians were tried in military courts during the rule of Field Marshal Mohammed Tantawi, who governed until the middle of last year. In the interim, elections were held for both a parliamentary body that would draft a new constitution and a new president. The Muslim Brotherhood-aligned political bloc won both elections, and their new government became caught in a vice between a social crisis of poverty, unemployment, and economic stagnation on the one hand, and the International Monetary Fund, Western governments, and Gulf monarchies on the other. To get large-scale international loans from the IMF, Egypt is being pressed to eliminate the subsidies on food and fuel that millions depend on. Fearful of both the masses and its capitalist supporters, the Muslim Brotherhood presided over a downward spiral that further opened up rifts between large sections of the population and the Morsi government. Now that the Brotherhood government has been overthrown, the military finds itself once again in effectively a position of state power. It is attempting to stabilize the situation and occupy the power vacuum left after the Morsi government was thoroughly discredited by mass protests. The experience of the Egyptian people's heroic struggle is proof that revolution is a process, not just a single decisive moment. The revolutionary forces are now trying to navigate an even more complicated environment to achieve their aims. One key question is over the role of the army. Socialists understand a military as a component of what's called the state. The police, legislators, the courts, the prisons, and other formal governing institutions are also part of the state. The state exists to maintain the rule of one class over another. In the case of Egypt, the army exists to protect the rule of the capitalist class, and more specifically, the section of the capitalist class that benefits from the imperialist domination of their country. The connection between the Egyptian military and the Egyptian ruling class is very direct, and in some cases the two are almost indistinguishable. The army controls between 15 and 40% of the economy, owning everything from electronics factories to restaurants to gas stations. Oftentimes, lower-ranking soldiers are exploited by their officers in these businesses. But there's still a significant amount of confusion within the revolutionary movement about the role of the army. Reacting to the massive outpouring in the streets, the military dealt the final blow to the Morsi regime by suspending the old governing bodies and appointing a new transitional authority. The SCAF postured as saviors of the masses, fulfilling the demands of the protests out of a sense of democratic and national responsibility. The most progressive and revolutionary-minded forces are now urging the people to remember the true interests of the leaders of the army and to continue fighting during this new period of military rule. The SCAF has not been successful in its goal of restoring stability to the capitalist system in Egypt. A wide range of political forces are jockeying for power. The Muslim Brotherhood has been leading a wave of demonstrations against what they term a military coup, which, while smaller than the June 30th demonstrations, still number in the hundreds of thousands. If they're able to monopolize the struggle against the military, it's possible that the masses who made the revolution could be sidelined. The main opposition group during the Morsi presidency, the National Salvation Front, is also looking to take advantage of the situation and has largely aligned itself with the army. The NSF is composed mostly of liberals who advocate for democratic rights, but are unconcerned with the social justice demands of the revolution, like the right to employment, housing, and education. The military has appointed many liberal leaders, like Mohammed El-Baradei, to senior positions in the new government. The NSF also contains some leftist forces that oppose the anti-worker, anti-poor policies that date back many decades and want to enact progressive reforms. Loyalists of the Mobarak regime who are able to survive the revolution with their bureaucratic power intact are also maneuvering. They hope that the overthrow of the Muslim Brotherhood government will give them an opportunity to appeal for law and order and effectively undo the revolution. And of course, the one political force that has proven its ability to take the initiative time and time again is the revolutionary masses who overthrew Mubarak and Morsi and are still in the streets today. Their continued struggle keeps the ongoing revolution alive. But what is still lacking in Egypt is a coherent revolutionary voice. The agendas of the various collectives, social movements, and political parties often conflict with one another. With the increasingly urgent need for solutions to the vast social problems that have ignited the revolution, socialist ideas offer the clearest path to a resolution. This all points to the need for an organization of the most advanced, dedicated revolutionary fighters. It's impossible to predict what will happen in such a complex class struggle, but in a sense, the Egyptian people have already won. They have proven beyond a shadow of a doubt the power of protest. If we follow the lead of our sisters and brothers in Egypt, poor and working people right here in the heart of world imperialism can also overthrow the racist, oppressive regime that rules over us. Thank you.